Welcome to Your Family's Health, the program that focuses on healthcare issues with unique and different modalities for taking charge of your health today. Experts talk weekly with our continuing roster of guests from around the country and right here in Nassau County to keep you up to date on the latest health issues and trends. Take care of your mind, body, and soul. Spend the next half hour with the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC, and get on the journey to better health.
Hello and welcome to Your Family's Health. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard from the nursing department here at Nassau Community College. Today we're going to learn about an organization that provides free online resources, services, and support to those who stutter, as well as support for research into the causes of stuttering. My guest today is Jane Fraser, president of the Stuttering Foundation. Jane, welcome to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
It's so good to have you. What an interesting topic we're going to talk about today. Tell us about how you started with the foundation and your background in connection to this problem of stuttering.
Well, the foundation was started 75 years ago by my father, who stuttered significantly himself. And so I grew up knowing what stuttering was, seeing how it affects lives. And when he turned 43 years old, he decided to give 10% of his annual income towards starting a foundation to help people who stutter. So when he turned 80 years old, he said, I hope you will move back from France, where I was living at the time, and run the foundation. So that happened, and that's why I'm where I am today. And of course, his struggle with stuttering is one of the reasons that I have always felt a need to help other people who stutter. So making a real long story short for you.
So what is stuttering, and how would you in some way very simply define it?
To try to simply define it, it's a communication disorder, and you can hear it either in repetitions, repetitions like that, or blocks. Some people have total blocks where they can't say a word and they go like that, or prolongations like I just did. So the word is just drawn out and they can't get it out. Mm-hmm. So it is clearly a real problem for people trying to communicate. And if you think about the telephone, for example, that's just a nightmare for people who stutter, because the person on the other end of the line, all they hear is silence sometimes, or they don't know what's happening. They don't understand what's happening. So that's a major challenge, one of many for people who stutter.
So doesn't everybody stutter? And what is the difference between everyday speech stumbling and someone who is officially diagnosed or, with the issue of stuttering?
Well, that's a really good question. And I always say, if you hear your child, especially the 2- and 3-year-olds say, Mommy, 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 I want an ice cream cone. That's different from Mommy, Mommy, You can hear the difference. There's some struggle behavior involved. All of us repeat. All of us are going to just go like I just did then. But the difference, I think, is true. It's in the ear of the listener. And people, even though it's a foreign language, you would recognize when someone's struggling to get their words out. It's really an auditory thing that helps you understand what it is and know the difference. So again, I think the parents are the ones that signal it usually. First of all, a child would just be looking for the word, repeating mommy, mommy sort of thing. But once they go to mommy, it's hard to talk. That's when you kind of signal your red flag goes up and you know that it's become a real problem for that child.
What may be some of the causes of stuttering?
The number one cause is genetics. So my dad stutters, his brother stuttered, other family members have stuttered. And so I would say something like, we know 60% of all people who stutter, it runs in their family. We also know that it's a neurophysiological problem. And that is, if you think that there's 45,000 neuromuscular events per second to say a word. So all this stuff's going on. You're hearing what the person's saying to you. You're formulating what you're going to say, and you're having to respond. All of that is just happening rapid fire. And so for someone who stutters, that system is perhaps not as well developed or developed slightly differently. So that could be one of the problems. And again, those kinds of things work themselves out for many children. So sometimes you have as many as 5% of all kids who go through some stuttering. But in the end, apparently just 1% of the population stutters. So for most people, that system develops the way it should. The other thing that could be a cause is a mismatch. So you've got a baby Einstein who's 3 years old, and he's using huge words and long sentences, and he stumbles over them. Then you've got a mismatch of a child who has way too big a vocabulary and can't handle it physically. And I think in that situation, that's maybe the easiest situation to improve, because I think parents want their child to be the brightest, the smartest one around, but that isn't always a good idea. When you're reading with a 2 or 3 year old, you should read books that are appropriate for their age, and not be so proud because they can understand what you would read to a 10-year-old. So I think if your child's struggling with that kind of a vocabulary, it's good to go back to nursery rhymes. By the way, nursery rhymes have been used for hundreds of years to teach children vocabulary. You think about it, Jack and Jill went up the hill to get a pail of water. The whole rhythm of nursery rhymes or rhyming books, Dr. Seuss, Jessie Bear, What Will You Wear? All those rhyming books are just the very best for teaching language to children.
How is it that some people who stutter in everyday common language, when they perform, they don't have the issue of stuttering?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, too. One of them is, think about James Earl Jones, for example.
Yes.
They know the lines. They know what they're going to say ahead of time. So you've got a memorization. You don't have a word retrieval problem. Sometimes people who stutter, one of the things that may aggravate them is word retrieval, finding that right word. So if they're on stage, they've memorized the words, they've done rehearsals over and over again. The other situation where no one will stutter is singing. You're using your voice box in a totally different way. When you're singing, the airflow is different, everything about it. And again, you've memorized the words. You know the words to that song.
So it's a word retrieval issue? Or
it can be a word retrieval issue for sure.
Okay.
But also the repetition, I think, when you're on stage, you're also stepping out of yourself. You're not that person under pressure to respond. So if you ask me a difficult question, I might be thinking, oh gosh, am I going to answer the right thing? This would be true for kids in school. Do I know the right answer? Mm-hmm. So you're under other pressures as well. But if you're in a play and you're reciting lines, you know what those lines are. There's not that pressure of you're going to give the wrong answer. So it's a totally different situation. We don't think of it that way. We think of every time we open our mouths, it's the same thing, but it's actually very different.
Yeah.
And of course, the singing thing is Robert Merrill is another person that you may not have ever heard of because he was an opera star. But when he started to stutter, his mother said, just sing to me. And that was the beginning of his singing career, he claims. I mean, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But, may I have a cookie?
Right.
And he didn't have any trouble with that. And he feels that helped him get over his stuttering.
So is there a treatment or even a cure for stuttering?
Well, I think that when you talk in terms of 2 and 3-year-olds and early intervention and changing some of the things that you're doing at home, for example, giving that child plenty of time to talk. I'm not talking about spoiling. I think there's a really fine line there. If you're cooking dinner and the child wants to interrupt you, and then you have a way of saying, come back in 5 minutes. Mommy's busy right now. So you don't want to spoil the child, but it is important at some point to take that time to listen to the child, or let the child know that you will have time to listen to them at some point. Interruptions are not good either. Try to avoid interrupting the child. Ask fewer questions. You've seen parents in the supermarket. What is that? What is that called? What color is that? Just bombarding a 3 or 4-year-old with questions. Cut back the number of questions, and instead of saying, what'd you have at lunch today at school, say, oh, I wonder what you had for lunch. You see the difference? I wonder. That takes all the time pressure off. I wonder the magic words. I wonder what happened at school today. I wonder what you had for lunch. I wonder if your best friend was at school today. Instead of, was your best friend there? What'd you do? Did you play on the playground? I wonder if you played on the playground. So indirect, all of those, I call them cures. So you asked me, is there a cure? Those are ways to really give that child self-assurance when speaking, and to get them over that hump of learning to talk. As they say, learning to talk is a big job for a little person.
You're listening to Your Family's Health on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard, and today you are learning about an organization that provides free online resources, services, and support to those who stutter, as well as support for research into the causes of stuttering. My guest today is Jane Fraser, president of the Stuttering Foundation. So, Jane, does stuttering affect men or women more?
4 to 1, men to women.
Wow.
So, yeah. It's not fair, is it? We really don't know. We really don't know absolutely why.
Right.
But if you think about little boys seem to mature a lot slower. So a little 6-year-old girl could be in first grade easily. Sometimes boys need to wait till they're 7. Boys' overall development is slower.
So do we grow out of it ever? You grow out of it? I know you said the children.
You could use the word grow out. And I think what's happening is the whole neurophysiological system is maturing and it's syncing up, if you want to think of it that way. What had been difficult before. And again, if you think about taking the pressures off while those systems are developing, giving that child time to finish his sentences or her sentences, taking the pressure off of questions and things like that, then that allows their system to develop. So yes, some children do outgrow it. In fact, more than 80%. One of the problems with that high percentage of outgrowing spontaneously is that over the years, pediatricians have said to parents, oh, don't worry, he'll outgrow it. And the real problem is when your child doesn't. And so the things to look for are, you should notice that the child is gradually becoming more fluent. But if on the contrary, it's becoming more bothersome, then that is time that you probably will want to look for a speech pathologist who specializes in stuttering.
Because this is a verbal issue, could this be classified as a disability?
It is classified as a disability.
It is. As a disability, what services are provided for people who have stuttering?
All children receive free therapy in the schools. But here's the problem. To qualify, you have to show that it's affecting your education.
Okay.
Now, I think a really competent therapist will say, all children are affected. If they can't raise their hand in class or they're afraid to, of course it affects them. But of course, because it costs the school districts a lot of money to provide these services, that many of them make it hard for parents. So we have a brochure that's free on our website that talks to parents about how to qualify, what laws they can go into the school and quote the law and let them know, let the school staff know that they do expect their child to get help and to be provided help. So yes, sometimes it just takes a real advocacy from the parent. But all school children are supposed to, and even the little preschoolers, before they start school, are supposed to receive free speech therapy.
So I know that you talked about speech therapy, but I know that stuttering, because it is a verbal disorder, would you call it disorder?
It is a disorder.
So
yeah.
It's a verbal disorder, and I know that sometimes, their peers can be very mean.
Absolutely.
And they can be targeted. Is there other kinds of support that's available for people who stutter, psychological support in schools or out of schools that would be good for people or children who are in schools and stutter?
There's a wonderful support group called Friends, the Association of and it's for kids who stutter, just for kids who stutter. And there's also the National Stuttering Association that have support groups around the country. So yeah, there absolutely are support groups. And usually it's the local speech therapist that starts those. Quite often it's the local speech therapist who starts the support group for the children. So, if you do have a child who stutters, look in your local newspaper, see if there's a group that you can join, or reach out to us, Stuttering Foundation, www.stutteringhelp, that's HELP.org. Go to our website, and there's a place to ask questions, free information, and we can provide you that information.
Now, I remember in the beginning of this interview that you said that your father began this organization. Is that true?
That's right.
And he stuttered.
He stuttered.
Now, in the household growing up, did he stutter, as he was probably having conversation with you or your siblings or your mom? Never stuttered.
Heard him at home. Never heard him stutter at home. Only when he was out in public under pressure.
Isn't that interesting?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Well, I think what happens then is what happens to people who are, remember, the number one fear for many people is public speaking.
Yes.
Standing up in church, standing up in school, think about tomorrow. Well, it's not a problem for you because you're a radio announcer, or at least you are today. But for most people, that is absolutely terrifying. So what happens? The stress that you feel, one of the first places you feel it is here, is on your speech mechanism, and you tighten up. And for many people, their voice will go up an octave when they're afraid. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things I suppose the police look for, the traffic, you get stopped in traffic and the person's so frightened that they can't speak, whether they stutter or not. By the way, one thing we do have for all people who stutter is an ID card that says, I'm a person who stutters. That's just incredibly helpful. If you've ever been caught speeding, I hope you haven't. And it's been at least 30 years since I've been caught. But anyway, the other place that it's extremely helpful is going through the TSA if you're boarding an airplane.
Right.
And they ask you questions. And we had a young woman who missed her connection because she stuttered. And they asked her where she was going and she couldn't say it. They pulled her aside and she missed her connection. And really, she's the one that helped us put the ID card together because of that event that happened to her. So, yes, being under terrible stress is not the cause of stuttering, but it certainly is an aggravator.
I've met some stutterers, and I notice what they do when they are stuttering. They take a deep breath so as to push the word out. That's what it appears to me that they were doing. Is that one of the ways that they can get words out? What are some of the ways that stutterers can facilitate articulating words easier?
Well, one of the things that we tell people not to say to people who stutter is don't tell them to take a deep breath. Oh, just take a deep breath and you'll be fine. Because sometimes it turns into gaspy kind of speech like that. Mm-hmm. What you do want to do, and I'll just give the example of my father. His first name was Malcolm. He learned to relax his lips and go, Malcolm. So it might not sound like an M that you or I would make, but it was an M that didn't trigger the stutter for him, mm-hmm. Malcolm. Mm-hmm. And then with Fraser, he had a terrible time saying that. And he would go, Fraser. And so what he learned to do was focus on the R and go, Fraser. So my name is Malcolm Fraser. Mm-hmm. And that kind of removed, so he knew he could say his name at that point. That took the fear of saying his name away. And because the fear and the pressure of that was gone. So yes, fear plays a big role. We haven't talked about fear, but cognitive behavior therapy, which is used with people who are afraid to fly, it's used with people of fear of any situation. Cognitive behavior therapy has been huge help to people who stutter. I'll just give you an example. A therapist would take a teen into Starbucks to order a coffee. And beforehand, they'd talk about what's going to happen. And the teen would say, if I stutter on coffee, everybody's going to laugh at me. So the therapist says, well, let's go in and you order and we'll just see what happens. So then he goes in and he goes, coffee, and nobody laughs. This is cognitive therapy, making people realize that it's not as bad as they thought. Mm-hmm. And doing this repetitively, going over and over again, so that what he feared was going to happen, he begins to realize isn't. And I suppose with taking a plane, when I talked about this during the King's speech, one of the people interviewing me from, I don't know, was it CBS or ABC, but she had to fly out for the Oscars in Los Angeles, and she was terrified of flying. She said, Jane, I'm so happy you're talking about cognitive behavior therapy because I'm going to a cognitive behavior therapist so that I can get on that plane and go out to cover the Oscars next month. And it's really, so what they did with her was walk her, go to the airport first. Try to get her over the fear of just going to the airport, then going to a plane that wasn't going up to the plane, then boarding the plane and sitting there and then getting off. And so this is kind of what it is, approaching the stuttering and realizing that it's not as bad as you imagined in your head. And this, I think the cognitive behavior therapy is one of the things that has really helped people a lot. Another is solution-focused brief therapy, and that teaches people to recognize when they've improved. So the fact that they're even going into Starbucks, realizing, hey, 6 months ago, you wouldn't have even walked in there. That's real success. So pointing successes out rather than focusing on failures, focusing on success. And you know that's good with everything.
Oh, yeah. That sounds positive reinforcement is always
positive reinforcement.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're listening to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard, and today you're learning about an organization that provides free online resources, services, and support to those who stutter, as well as support for research in the cause of stuttering. My guest today is Jane Fraser, president of Stuttering Foundation. So, Jane, very informative. Is it ever too late for those who have a stuttering condition? Is it ever too late to get help?
Absolutely not. When my dad turned 70, he decided he was going to write a self-therapy book. It is now in its 12th edition. It's been translated into 26 languages by people who have been helped by it. It has guidelines that people can use to help themselves. Walter Annenberg, the founder of TV Guide, called me when he turned 90 And he said, Jane, I'm stuttering again. And I said, well, have you gotten out your self-therapy book and gone over it? And he called me back a week later. He said, I've gone over those guidelines and I feel like I'm back on target. One of them is to slow your speech. I know it sounds very simplistic, but it's easier to control slow speech. And the other thing that people forget, slow speech is very powerful. Mm-hmm. It's much more powerful. You've used some excellent slow speech today when you're reading your opening lines. People really latch onto that. It's a great tool. So it's not just that it's helping your stutter, but it's making you a better speaker. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then I think the other thing is be open about your stuttering. So if you're entering in a situation that's difficult, announce up front, sometimes I stutter. I'm a person who stutters. If you notice that I'm stuttering, I want you to know I'm a person who stutters sometimes. Then you're putting your listener at ease. They're not going to, because otherwise they're thinking, oh my goodness, why is this person stuttering? What's going on? What do I need to do? So you're helping yourself and you're also helping your listener when you do that. So that's kind of exciting. So those are two things. The third thing is maintain eye contact. A lot of people who stutter will look down as if they're ashamed, and they are. They have become, many people who stutter are ashamed. They apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. There's nothing to apologize for. This is a condition that they have. But over time, when it's punishing, it's very punishing. And if you think about, it's really one of the toughest disorders out there. If somebody's in a wheelchair, you immediately know that they have a disability. If they're deaf, you may see a hearing aid in their ear. Not anymore, actually. Right. They've gotten so
sophisticated with it.
Very sophisticated. But if you see a person who stutters, you don't really know that person is struggling to speak or that person is afraid.
Yes.
What's going to happen when they open their mouth? Yeah, it's a tough problem, but absolutely there's help at all ages.
I really want to hear about your Stuttering Foundation and how we can reach out to you.
It's stutteringhelp.org or dial 800-992-9392.
If we want to give donations to the Stuttering Foundation, can we do that?
You can do that online as well.
Or volunteer?
Or volunteer. Yeah. Start a support group in your area.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you so much for being here, Jane Fraser, president of the Stuttering Foundation. We appreciate all this information and we hope you stay healthy and continue to do the great work with this foundation.
Thank you so much for having us today. Thank you for focusing on stuttering.
And this is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard from the nursing department here at Nassau Community College. And we want to thank you for listening to this edition of Your Family's Health.
We'd like to get your feedback on your family's health. Send your comments by emailing them to whpc@ncc.edu. Podcasts of today's show are available on iTunes, Android Podcasts, and Spreaker. This program was produced at the studios of Nassau Community College in cooperation with the Nursing Department. Join us next week for another edition of Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.